4. Before we get started, we just have a quick top hat question just to see how last week's exercises went. Um, yeah. So if everyone wants to get over to top hat, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes, and then I'll start the little questionnaire. Also, too, if you guys wouldn't mind putting in the chat, just curious to see how you guys found the exercises. You guys have any troubles with them at all? Anything, any questions you guys have about them at all? Also, the top hat question is now up. Just asking you guys how last week went. Weren't too bad. They went well. I know I had a few mentees message me last week as well. Um, yeah. They're fine. Good. I like to hear. Sounds good, Ryan. If you need help, Ryan, like I said, um, always message one of us if you're having trouble. The Discord bot is working. I think it's working at selective times, but if you guys can get into your groups as soon as possible, like do the set group Saturday and then your group number. Um, and then the first Bug Busters exercise. Let me double check.
I had a quick question. What if you've been attending the classes but you're not on the leader on the board, like the Ignite, I guess like the score sheet and all that?
Like, are you registered in the courses, right?
Yeah, I am.
I think we've been. I don't know how consistent the updating of the board has been.
Okay.
Um, just I would just double check it periodically. Like if it's been a couple weeks, then maybe say something. But I think we're trying to be on top of it as much as we can. So they may not be always 100% accurate, like right after a session, but what's it called? They should be updated sooner rather than later.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, is everyone 32 to 32? Okay, should be good. All right. So let's just see. Oh, I want to see responses. Okay, we're great. We're hard. Not too many easy for the Pythonic lava. That's good. Things are getting harder. That's what we like to see. Good. Okay. So let's move on for today. Sorry, just give me a sec. Okay, so quick overview of what we're doing today. So we have another application of software in human gene editing. We're going to review last week's stuff, which is the if, elif, else statements. And then we're also going to review the logical operators. And then today's main focus will be list and loops. Okay. So also a quick reminder, if you guys haven't already, please join us on Discord. It's the best way to get a hold of your mentors. Um, and ask for help. Also, you can ask for help from other mentees in your group section. Yeah, this is the sign up. If you guys, sorry, the Discord links is also at the bottom. If you haven't signed up already, just a quick reminder of how to sign up for your role or use the bot commands to get set into your group. You just need to do !group set the day. So for us, it'd be Saturday dash and then the group number. It's all lowercase. And yeah, the email for which group number you're in is in your email. Also, too, if you're unsure, you can also ask your mentor when we get into the breakout rooms because they'll have it as well. So decoder. So uh CRISPR is a technology that allows scientists to edit human genes. But a lot of times, what happens is, or what can happen, is that there's unintended change to DNA, right? So the stuff that we don't want to happen, right? There's been a new app called Decoder that uses algorithms to detect or quickly detect if any changes due to the gene editing have occurred, right? And it gives doctors enough time to assess potential risk of these changes. Okay, this is another thing that a software engineer would be responsible. Again, this requires also a little bit of knowledge of human genes and that kind of field as well. But if you have knowledge of both, you can really start to apply and become more than just useful in the workplace, right? You can start to really show your skill, right? So it's another application of software engineering that we have. Okay, so review of last week's stuff. So the if, elif, and else statements. Okay, how do you guys feel with the if, elif, else statements? Because I had a few people ask me about it last week, and um, some people seem to get it, some people seem to understand it. If you guys wouldn't mind just throwing in the chat how you guys are feeling with if, else statements. But just a quick review, right? Like if you have a series of if, elif, and else statements, you guys got to remember that like if the statement, right? So like if mouse y is less than 500, right? If that statement is true, it skips everything else. Like the elif and the else statement don't work. Okay. Um, but if that statement is false, right, you're going to go to the next one, you're going to check it, and you're going to keep going until you hit the else statement, or you run out of statements. Okay. One thing I want to mention too is that sometimes you guys will encounter in programs and stuff you code is that the order of what you put these else statements, and the order of which, yeah, the order of which these statements go, right? Like if you're checking first mouse y is greater than 500 matters. Okay. Just a quick example. If we were to swap, like if mouse x is less than 500 and mouse y is like if we were to swap these two, right, you would see the ball on this half of the screen start turning red when we don't want it to. Okay, so that's one thing you guys need to make sure of. It always helps that if you're encountering errors like this, sometimes to go through the code, right? Just go line by line and you just say, okay, if the ball's here, what's going to happen when I go through these if statements, right? It sometimes it helps you clear up where you're kind of making a mistake, and it can save you a lot of time if you're having trouble. Okay. So, and then we also have our logical operators review. So for the and logical operator, right? It's true if and only if both statements are true on however many you have. Okay. So again, quick review. If 5 is greater than 3 and 6 is greater than 3, they both are, they're both true. So that whole statement is true. Okay. If you were to put like if 5 is greater than 3 and 6 is greater than 3, right? That the code underneath that if statement would run. Okay. And then for or, it's true if any of the statements are true. Okay. So you just need one of them to be true, and then the whole thing's true. Okay. And then not just gives you the opposite of true or false. So if you have like not true is false, or if you have not false is true. Okay. So let's get into list. So list is a way to hold multiple values, and it's really handy for storing a lot of values. Okay. Um, they're much more efficient than say creating a series of variables, right? Each with their different name, right? Like if you had, like you guys can see, this is a list of students, right? And their names, right? If you were to create, say, student one equal to Jack, student two equal to Henry, student two equal to Alice, right? That's a lot of code to write. Whereas a list can not only do it more efficiently, but it also looks clean in your code and makes it easier to read. Okay. Um, to way to tell that we have a list is using these square brackets. Okay. So this is an example of creating a list here. Okay. So we have a list. The name of that list is random numbers, right? And it's equal to this list here. Okay. So you can use, if you see you have the first square bracket, you have your first value, and then you need a comma and then the next value. Okay. If you're at the end of your list, right, you don't put a comma. Okay. This is a list of 4 values of what's it called? Of just straight integers. You can also have list of strings and booleans. Okay. Whatever you need. Okay. One thing to note about Python list, okay, and we'll talk about this more later, is that you can actually mix the type of values that you guys have inside the list. They all don't need to be one type. And that's one of the beautiful things about Python, is that it's very, very flexible, especially when it comes to list. It makes things all very, very smooth. Okay. The other thing that you guys will see as well is that you can actually change the size of list. Okay. In other programming languages like C++, Python, or not Python, C++, Java, right? You can't, it's much more difficult to change the size of a list. Okay. That's one nice thing about Python, is it makes that very easy. Okay. So let's look inside of a list. So let's say you have a list of numbers called my numbers, right? And these are the numbers that you have in your list, okay? And let's say you want to extract one of those values for whatever reason. Let's say you're using it, let's say you're printing out the value of one of the numbers in your list. Okay. Well, how do you do that? Well, one way to do it is to use the index value of that value in your list. Okay. Now the index just assigns a number basically in order of each value from left to right, that says that like the first value is this. Okay. Now, one thing to note, index values start at 0. Okay. So the first value is of index 0, as you guys can see in this table here. Okay. You can see that 101 is the first value in our list, but it has an index value of 0. Okay. So if we were to example want to print the third value, right, which is 303, we have to use index number 2. Okay. You can always think of it as like the index value is 1 minus, or sorry, like the place of that value. So the third value, if you want to get its index number, you do, if you want the third value, right, which is like the third number, right, you have to do 3 minus 1, right, and you'll get your index number. Okay. So that's how you index values. Okay. The way you do it too, right, to only get a single value, is you need to print out the name of your list, a square bracket, the index number, and then another square bracket. Okay. This will print out 303 in your console. Okay. Does that kind of make sense? Good. So using lists. So you can use the values of a list very similar to how we use variables, right? Like I said before, list, if you have a lot of the same values, like say you have a list of student names or a list of integers that you want to use, it makes it a lot neater and a lot simpler to read when you use a list, right? So you can use those values within a list to do stuff that we've done previously in this course, like create a circle, right? Where you're using here, right? Using the values of this list, right? So first value 75, that's going to be our X. Second value 100, that's our Y. We're going to have our width, which is our third value, be here. And then our fourth value, which is 40, is going to be our height. Okay. Just a quick note. Even you guys can see here that numbers has 4 values and ellipse takes in 4 values. If you use ellipse and then numbers, like just put in the number of the list, that won't work. Okay. And the reason that won't work is because this ellipse, right, it requires 4 numbers. Okay. But 4 numbers individually. If you put in a list, right, Python or the computer is going to read this as, okay, you're saying you want an ellipse, but you're giving me a list. Okay. Python isn't smart enough, the computer isn't smart enough to say, oh, okay, it wants the numbers within those lists. It's just going to see it as a list. Okay. So if you're using a list to say create an ellipse or a rectangle, you need to specify which index values you want to use to create that shape. Okay. So modifying lists. So we've seen how you can get the values within a list, how to make a list, but like say if you want to change a value within a list. Okay. So we have our numbers list here, right? 2, 5, 6, and 8. And we see the index values associated with each value. Okay. And let's say we want to change the first value to 3. Okay. Right now it's 2. We want to change it to 3. You can do the same thing that we did before when it comes to indexing, but then you can put an equal sign after and then the new value you want. Okay. It's pretty straightforward. Okay. You just have to keep in mind, again, the index values if you want the first value is 0. Okay. Any questions about that before we move on? No? Okay, good. Okay, so this brings us to our first question of the day. Okay, so we want to know what the diameter of the ellipse drawn. Does that permanently change index 0 to 3? Yes, it does. Yeah. So array, yeah, the index value, right? So the index value, so there's the first value has an index 0. And yes, that does change this value to 3. Okay, so if you were to do numbers is equal to this, right? And then you were to change the first value to 3, anytime after that code has been run, right? The first value will be 3. Okay, and that's of index 0. So yeah, so let's get back to our first question. So we want to know the diameter, right? So let's look at the code quickly here. We have a list of values, okay, and then we are modifying these values a bit, okay, and then we're using some of them in to create an ellipse, okay. So we want to know what's the value of x3 at this point, okay. So I'm going to start that question now. If you guys want to go over to Top Hat, I'll leave the code up here so you guys can reference it. And yeah, the question's up, guys. So whenever you're ready, answer. Correct. Yes. Angel, yeah. This line here, guys, where it's x of 3, or sorry, the fourth value in x is equal to the second value times 2. That's not a power. Okay. A minute left, guys. Last 30 seconds. Seems like it. Oh, still got a couple of people. There's 5 seconds left, guys. If you guys haven't answered, do it now. Okay, time is up. So let's check what you guys said and go through it. Okay, so so most of you guys said 100, okay, and that would be the correct answer. Okay, so let's go through and see why that is. Okay, so right, first thing we're doing here is we have our list, right? You guys can all see the values. And then we're taking the second value, because remember, does anyone know what this x value is actually? Can anyone tell me what that value is at this point in the code? You guys just type it into the chat. Okay, I saw a couple different answers, but most of you seem like you got it right. So the answer is 40. Okay, remember x of 1, right? This value right here, this would be 40. Okay, so because the second value has an index value of 1. Okay, so this would be index 0, this would be index 1. So this is the one we're changing. Okay, and then we're taking that value. Okay, we're taking this value of 40 and we're adding 10 to it, and then we're setting this value back to 50. Yes. Okay, so this one here would be changed to 50 at this point. Okay, then at this point here, we're taking the fourth value, or index 3 of the X, which is our list, and we're setting it equal to the value we just set in the second, we're taking the new value of the second value of our list and we're multiplying it by 2. Excuse me. So at this point, we know that this value is 50. Okay. And then we're overwriting this value here by this value times 2. Okay. And then we're using it down here. Does everyone see how that would be 100 by the time this code is run, or by the time this ellipse is created? Perfect. Okay, good. So let's move on. So I said before that we can make our list bigger in Python, and it's very simple to do. So we can also add items to an existing list. So let's create our list first. So we have our shopping list, which consists of things that we might need to get from the grocery store, right? So we have our eggs, we have our ham, we have our cheese, we have our onions. Okay. Now, if we wanted to say add milk or bread to that, right, we can use the dot append function. Okay. The way it works, the syntax for the append function is you need the name of your list dot append, and then inside of the brackets is the value you want to add. Okay. The way append works is it always adds a value to the end of the list. Okay. So you guys can see here that like after creating this list, right, with just eggs, ham, cheese, and onions. Okay. If we go shopping list dot append milk and then shopping list dot append bread, we can see milk is added here and then bread, right? Because milk would be added to the end. This is our original list. Index is 0, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. We add a value to the end. The first one will be milk. And then we need, then we append bread to the end of it as well. Okay. Do you need quotation marks around all your values? No. So remember, Angel, do you remember from session 1 what it means to have quotation marks around a value? What kind of value is that? Is that a string, integer kind of type? Do you know? Or does anyone know? String, correct, right? This is a string. You can also have single quotes. It's the same thing in Python, right? So that's just telling Python that you're adding a string to the that you're adding a string. Okay, this is just telling Python that it's a string. Okay, if you wanted to add an integer, you could just put 1. You don't need the quotes. Okay, I'll show you guys a quick example here after we get through this list stuff. But yes, does everyone understand the append? Right, you need the name dot append and then the value inside the brackets. Okay. You can also remove values, okay, but remove works a little bit differently in that the sense that you need to specify the value that you want to remove, okay? So if you want to say remove ham and onions, right, you need to put those in the remove function and it'll remove it from the list and then the list will condense, all right? It's very similar to append except for you're doing the opposite. Let's see here, okay. You can also get the length of the list, okay, using the length function, okay? And all you need to do for this to work, right, is you just need to put the words the letters len bracket and then the name of your list, and this will return the value of this list, okay? So one thing to note, right, is for this list that we have here, right, the value that we print out is 4. Okay, because we have 4 values. We can clearly see that. If we count them 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 4 values. But you guys remember that what would be the index value of Alex? Can anyone tell me? Can you guys put it in the chat? And 3, right? So there's a bit of a pattern when it comes to list, okay, is that the last value has an index value in a list that is the length of that list minus 1. Okay. So it's a little handy trick to know, hey, if you always want the last value, right, in a list, that's a very simple way to get it. Okay. You could do length of list minus 1 and then find the index value. Yeah. What's next here? Oh, okay. Yes. So this is a bit of a cheat sheet of some of the common list methods that a lot of people would use. This is kind of the basics. So we already went over append, remove, and length. Okay, we can do index, right? So what index does is it tells you the index value of that item that you searched up. So if we went back to like this list here and we went students dot index Henry, right? Can anyone tell me what the value that would return would be? Can you guys 0, right? Good. Okay. So you guys get it. Okay. The syntax is very similar to remove, where you do name of your list dot, instead of remove, you do index and then the value. Okay. We have sort. Sort also it sorts the array from lowest value to highest value. Okay. And I believe when it comes to strings, it does that in what's it called? In alphabetical order. Okay. And then we have reverse, which just flips the elements of that list in its place. So if a value is at the end, it's going to become at the front. Okay. You guys can also see here that like sort, reverse, and length, sort and reverse, they don't require anything inside the brackets, but you still need to put the brackets there when you call them. Okay. One other thing I wanted to show you guys is if you guys go to these slides on the website, in the notes, you guys are going to see this link for Python documentation. Okay. And I'm going to show you guys what this is. So documentation, when it comes to coding, is basically just it tells you how functions work for a given item. Or you'll see this a lot with like libraries. So if you import libraries, and we'll get into that later, like this will tell you kind of what each function does, or like what you can use. Okay. So this is from the official Python website, and this is all the what's it called? All the functions that you can actually use with list, with the just vanilla Python, okay, without importing anything. Okay, you guys, when you guys get into software engineering or computer science or any sort of programming, right, you guys will find that documentation is very handy, because a lot of times in assignments you're not given everything that you need to know to complete. Okay, because you need to do some of that on your own. Okay, so to kind of walk you guys through documentation, okay, like this is for list. Okay, so there's other stuff you can search up to. You can do sets, dictionaries. We'll get into dictionaries later, but these are all the functions that you can do with a list, right? So like, for example, there's one here called list.insert. Okay, so this is just saying that you need a list type, and then you can use the dot insert, and then you have 2 arguments. You have like I and X. Okay, and it just briefly describes what this function does. Okay, it says it inserts an item at a given position. Okay, the first argument is the index of the element before which to insert. So if you have a list called A and you go A dot insert 0x, this inserts at the front of the list. Okay, and if you do the same thing, but if you do A insert length of A, right, and then X, right, it's the equivalent of appending in item X at the end of that list. Okay, so this is Python documentation, right? It's very long. Okay, you guys, they also provide some examples. Okay, but you guys might come across this throughout your programming careers, but it's just one thing to keep note of. It's very handy. Yeah, if you have some time, I would take a look at it and see if you can use some of those functions, like just play around with it, get an idea of how this stuff kind of works. Okay, so we're going to get into exercise 1. Before we get into exercise 1, I wanted to show you guys something really quick. So this is just a little example that I wanted to show you guys. Right, so I mentioned earlier that when it comes to Python list, it doesn't matter what values you put in your list. Okay, you can have different types. You can have strings, booleans, and integers. Okay, so this is kind of what I've shown you here. Don't worry about this. We'll actually get into this later today, but I just wanted to show you guys that. So if you have this list here, right, we can see the first value is a string, second value is an integer, third value is a boolean, right? So these are all 3 different types, right? And then this loop here, all it's doing is it's just printing out every value in the list. Okay, if I run this, you guys can see that each value gets printed out fine. There's no errors. Okay, and then I was also going to show you too, for the remove function, right? You can also specify, you can also use the indexing that we talked about earlier to specify which value you want to remove, right? Because depending on your code, that might be the way you have to do it, right? If you want to remove that value, right? And then we can see too that after this code is run and we print out the list again. So this is what we got before. If we run this again, we can see that we're removing the last value in our list, and you guys can see that true is no longer there. It's just a brief example, right? Keep in mind too that having different variables, different types of variables or data inside your list is something that's unique to Python. Okay. There are list types that are very similar to Python list in other programming languages. They're often called arrays. They don't allow for stuff like this. Okay. Again, this is why Python is so awesome and so easy to read. Okay. So let's get into exercise 1. So this is the lively bar graph. So we want you guys to use a list to draw 4 rectangles that grow with your mouse X. Okay. So they follow your X when it moves left to right. Okay. Quick hint, the list should store the values that are different for each bar. Okay. So keep that in mind when you are doing this exercise. Another few things to ask yourself to help you guys get through your exercise is which argument in the initialization of the rectangle should be included in your list. Okay, so we said in the previous slide that it should be the one thing that's different. Okay, what's the one thing that should be different between each bar graph? All right, we know that the X will be the same for all bars. Okay, and the width is determined by the mouse coordinate. Okay, and the height is the same for all bars. Okay, so I know this is when they say length here, what they really mean is height. Okay, because remember this is your width side to side, and then your height is up and down. Okay, so those are some things to keep in mind of when doing this exercise. So we're gonna go into the breakout rooms. I say, well, let's do it for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll see how well it goes for you guys. Okay, so breakout rooms are open. Please join them. We'll see you guys in 15 minutes. It. If you guys didn't get it, where did you guys get that kind of stuff? Just let me know how it was and stuff. Seems like it's good. Got it. Good. Perfect. All right, let's go over an example. So, there's some stuff in here that we've used pretty consistently, and I expect you guys to kind of at this point maybe, I don't really need to touch over it. I'll just gloss over it quickly. The from processing import star, again, we always need that. The setup is pretty basic. But so you guys can see here that we have a list, right? And we named it Y list for a reason. You guys will see here in a sec. So we created our Y list with a certain number of values, okay? And then we declared that Y list global inside of our draw function. We wanted to use this Y list and not a Y list that was defined inside our draw, right? We have our background looping, right? Because we have something moving. We have one of our shapes moving. You always want to have the background in the back or in the draw function if you have, say, like a moving shape inside your code. And then we define the color for each of our rectangles. And then you guys can see for each of these 4 rectangles, what's the one thing that's changing for each of these rectangles? What's the one thing that's different? Can you guys tell me? Close, Ryan. Y value. That's what I'm looking for, right? Yeah, the Y value. Okay. So Ryan, you're not wrong, right? The index value is changing, but it's changing because we want a different Y value for each one. Okay. And the Y values that we're using are the ones that are stored inside of our Y list, right? So like for this, let's say this third rectangle, what's the value of Y for that one? Can anyone tell me? You guys have an idea what the second index? 275, right? Okay, so you guys are understanding it, so that's good. So yeah, so that's the one thing that changes. That's the one thing we store on the value. It makes it a little bit simpler. Can you guys also see, like, can you guys maybe explain maybe what one use of putting all these values in a Y list is? right? Could you guys maybe, because we kind of talked about with variables, why we want to use variables, but it's very similar in this case. Like, why would we want to use the list instead of just putting 50, 130, 275, 400? What might be a reason to do that? Organization, yeah, that's a good one, right? Organization and simplicity, right? You know that every y value that we're going to use, right, is going to be here, okay, in this one line. So we just go in here, we can check, makes it a little bit simpler to read, right? Because another way to do is we could have done like y1 is equal to 50, right? Y2 is equal to 130, right? We could have done like that too. It's a bit more of a pain, right? This way, all the values are in one list, one line, makes it easy. If we run this, right, we can see they follow just fine. Okay. So let's move on. So now we're going to get into loops. Okay. So this is kind of the basics of loops. Okay. So loops are used to repeat code. Okay. A certain number of times. I know we touched on while loops before. But now we're going to touch on for loops. There's two different types of loops, while and for loops. Okay. This is probably the most common type of loop that you guys will use. I definitely use for loops much more than I use while loops in any type of code that I do. But just a quick analogy to help you guys understand it. Imagine you guys are going to the dentist, right? And the dentist would start by checking the first tooth. They would check if it's okay, and then they'd move to the next tooth, right? And they'd keep repeating this process, right? Until all the teeth are checked, right? That's kind of how a for loop works, right? It's like for whatever, and you guys will see what that whatever means, right? We want to do this for each value. Okay. So you can part of the reason why we did list and loops today is because you often combine the two. Okay. You often combine list with loops. Okay. And this is one example of how to say go through, print each value or access each value within a loop within a short piece of code. Okay. So we have our for loop, right? Which is here. Okay. That's our for loop. And we also have shopping list, which is our list, right? It's similar. It's the exact same one that we saw beforehand. We were talking about appending and removing values, right? But then we have this for loop. And what does for loop doing, right? The for item in shopping list, print item, is we're going through each value within the list and we're printing out that value. Okay. Now, the trick is what you need to understand here is that this for item in shopping list, what this is saying is that for each item in shopping list, right, we're going to do something. Okay. But to understand what item is this is what this syntax, what this is saying is item, the first time this loop runs is going to be set to eggs. Okay. The second time this loop runs, it's going to be set to ham. And then it's going to be set to cheese, and it's going to set to be onions. Okay. So whatever you want to do with that item, you do it in this loop. Okay. And then it's basically just saying for all the items in this list, do this. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? You guys we'll show you guys some more examples, but that's kind of the basic gist. All right. So that brings us to our next question. Okay, second question of the day. We have this list of numbers 2, 3, and 5, and we have a value x. Okay, and then in our for loop, so for each number in the numbers list, right, we're going to add that value to x. Okay, after that loop has run, what will be the value that gets printed out here? Okay, that's the question we're asking. Okay, so if you guys would like to, I will open that up on Top Hat. If you guys want to head over there. Where is Top Hat? I might have closed it. Whoops, give me a quick sec. Okay, so the second question is now up. Okay, go ahead and answer it. Oops, I mixed the questions here for your guys' reference. 30 seconds, guys. Last 10. I'm going to give us another 15 seconds here just for you guys to answer because I see that not everyone has answered yet. Okay. All right. So let's see what you guys answered. So most of you guys answered 10. Okay. And that would be the right answer. Okay. So just to reinforce what happens here, right? Remember that we're saying for each number in numbers, right? Numbers is our list, right? And we want to add that value to X, right? So essentially you're just going through and you're just adding these three values. So X at the end of this loop will be the sum of these of every number in the number list, which 2 plus 3 plus 5 is 10. Okay. Makes sense to everyone? Everyone got any questions? Yes, no, maybe so. No? Okay, let's move on. What does X equal to 0 mean? This is just setting X to 0. Okay. This is just giving it an initial value because if it didn't have that initial value and you tried to add a value to it, you get an error. Okay. Because like, yeah. Okay. So when to use loops? Okay. Loops are very, very, very useful if you're repeating a task multiple times. Okay. So let's look at the code that we just did in exercise 1, right? So if you guys remember, right, this is what we had. We had rectangle, we had 4 rectangles, and for each one, we put in the Y value that we wanted from Y list. Okay. But we could, and you guys can see, like, including this line up here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have 5 lines of code that we just wrote. Okay. What if I told you there's a way for you guys to do this in 3 lines? Okay. In doing so, we can use a loop. Okay. In doing so, right, you guys see here that we've consolidated this down into 3 lines and it just loops through with each value in the Y list, right? So we have our list here for each Y in the Y list. So each of these Ys, we want to create a rectangle using that Y value. Okay. Now, like you guys might be saying, okay, well, 3 lines isn't much smaller than 5 lines. What if you guys had 20 values in your Y list? What if you're creating 20 rectangles? You guys want to write 20 lines of code when you could still do it in 3? I don't, right? It's a much more efficient way of writing your code. Okay. And especially when you're using list. Okay. So again, like it's just another iteration of what we kind of went through in the last one, right? But each Y value just gets placed into that rectangle and it gets created. Okay. So like for the first issue, right, we'd use Y is 50, right? For the second one, we would get 135. For the third one, we get 275. For the fourth one, we get 400. Okay. So you guys can see. And then after each of those values have been read, it's done looping. It moves on to the code underneath it. Okay. So let's get into our second exercise for the day. So we're going to use a list and a loop now to draw 5 circles falling down the screen at the same time. Okay. Now, you guys saw in the last exercise how to use the list properly. The main focus of this exercise is using a loop. Okay. How can you guys use a loop to draw these circles much, much faster? Okay. For each circle, remember that the center position is the X position. It's different than about a rectangle. So think about that when you're creating your loops, right? And then you want to repeat this process for the number of circles using a for loop. Okay. Okay, so we'll give you guys about 15 minutes for this. Let's get into our breakout rooms. I don't think there's any pre-code for this. Nope. Okay, so let's get into our breakout rooms and we'll see you guys in about 15 minutes. Okay. how did you guys find that exercise? Did everyone get it? Did you guys have a little bit more trouble? We're gonna go over a solution here, but I just want to know how you guys did. If I can find. Oh, it's right here. Good, good. Okay. So let's go over an example. This. Just run that. Okay. So, if we look at the code that we have here for the solution, right? Again, from processing import star, always need that. And then we kept a list of, because remember that the one thing that stays, or one thing that stays the same is the, or that changes between each circle, right? Is the X position, right? So that's one thing that we might want to keep in a list, which we do here. Okay. We also have two Y variables, one for the position and one for the speed. Okay. We have our setup, right? And then we globalize all three of these right here inside of our draw. And then we have our background, which gives us our background, our fill for each ellipse, right? And then before we even go into the loop, we're going to increase the Y position by the speed, and then we're going to add a value to the speed. So in this example, like we're gonna have a little bit of like a gravity effect almost, right? It's going to be increasing speed as it goes down, right? Or accelerating downwards like gravity works. Gravity is a form of acceleration. Okay. But the main thing I want you guys to look at is this here. Okay. And this is the loop. Okay. Um, so for each value inside of here, right, we're going to create an ellipse with the X value being the X value from that from being an X value from within the X position array. Okay. And every time this is going to change, right? So the first time we're going to go, it's going to be 30. Second time we're going to go, it's going to be 90. Second time or third time we go, it's going to be 150. Fourth time, 210. Fifth time, 270. That's going to give us 5 circles. Okay. And then the only thing you guys really had to do on top of that was just the speed. Okay. If we run this code, we can see that, we have, if we run it again, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles, and then just fall downwards. Okay. Any questions about loops or anything like that before we move on? You guys are okay? Okay. Well, there'll be time to answer questions too at the end, guys. Let's just go on. So before we finish, we have one more thing that we're going to talk about, and that's combining loops and if statements. Okay. So you can, one thing you might want to do, and this happens a lot, is you might want to check every value within a list using a loop, but then you also will want to add some conditional statements in there as well. Okay. So in this case, right, we're doing the same thing that we did in the previous exercise where we created created 5 circles from left to right using the X positions within a list. Okay. But inside this loop, we're checking the value of that X and we're assigning it a color based on where it is. So you guys can see here that some of these circles are yellow, some of these are red. Okay. They the only time that one of these circles are red is if the X value in the X position, like the current X in that list, right, is greater than 150, then we're going to change it to red. Otherwise, it's going to be yellow. Okay. So this is one thing you guys can do too in loops. And this is something that happens all the time in coding. Okay. Like for example, you might have a list of values and you might want to check like, hey, if this value is equal to this, do something. Okay. This happens all the time. Okay. So we check X value, we fill it the color based on what we want. So this will do red. This is obviously yellow. And then we just print out the circle like we did in the previous exercise. Okay. This is just it in kind of an animated example, right? So we have our code here, right? First time we go, X is going to be equal to 40. Okay. And because X is equal to 40, it's not less than 150, or sorry, it's not greater than 150. So we're going to go to the else statement. Okay. And gives us that circle. Then we're going to do x is equal to 180. Check the if statement again. That statement will become false because x is not greater than 150. You're going to go to the else again. Okay. Same thing is going to happen for 120. Okay. We go through, we're going to get that one. Now, when we get to 160, right? We go through, 160 is greater than 150. So that's good. So then the fill value is going to be red, and we'll get that there. And the same thing for the last value, and we'll get red. Okay. Now, so let's move into the exercises for this week. Now, first one for bug busters is you guys are going to want to create this sort of target that follows your cursor, right? Think about the order. Think about using a list again that we did in the exercises, but also think about the order that you want the list in. Okay, because if you do it one way, you're going to see one big circle. If you do it another way, you'll get the correct output, which is kind of this target effect. Okay. For the second exercise, you are having a line of circles move across. Okay. From left to right, but every time you click, you create a new circle. Okay. So you're going to need a loop, but you're also going to need a conditional if statement that checks if something has happened. Okay. Try and think about what that thing is and what you might want to do if that thing has happened. Okay. For Pythonic Lava, you are creating a loading bar that follows your cursor. Depending on where your cursor is, if you guys notice in the example that square does not disappear until it reaches a certain point. Okay. And then for for the second exercise, you have this line of circles that follow your cursor. But anytime you click on one of those circles, they change into a big red circle. Okay, so that one is going to take a little bit of time. You're going to need a lot of checks or a couple of checks in there as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, guys, you guys can see in a lot of these examples, there's a lot of objects being created, a lot of shapes being printed out. So think about how you can use the list to kind of help with that. Okay. And loops. Loops are going to be very, very important for this as well. Okay. We also have some for just for fun that you can do. So we have a what's it called? A grid of squares that whatever cursor whatever square your cursor's on is the one that turns black. And then we have this one here, this ball. Anytime you click the mouse, you get a series of strings connected to the bottom of that circle. Okay. And that circle also gets smaller every time you click. Okay. There's also, if I saw someone do this in the Discord, you can create Pong. But this time, every time it hits one of the squares, it turns black. Okay. And I believe once you hit all the squares, it should stop. But yeah. So that brings us to the end of the session. Before we go for questions, guys, there's 2 more questions on Top Hat that I want you guys to answer. We have 2 end of session questions. If you guys wouldn't mind answering these, that'd be great. They're up right now. So if you guys, yeah, we'll just answer those quickly and then we'll finish off with some questions. And then we're done for the day, guys. I think that's everyone. Believe so, because we only have a. Yeah, that looks like everyone today. So we'll close that. And then we'll also, there's one more after this. Just asking you guys how the pacing was today. You guys can answer that one as well too. That'd be great. Okay. And then after this, we'll just answer any questions you guys have. Yeah. Okay. That looks like everyone. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Okay. We have a couple of minutes. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah. Other than that, if you guys don't have any questions, you are more than welcome to leave. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And yeah.